This is a CBS News special report. I'm John Dickerson in Washington. We're coming on the air today with the breaking news in the special counsel's investigation of Donald Trump. CBS News has learned that a federal grand jury has voted to indict the former president for his attempt to overturn the results of an election he lost, up to and including his role in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. This is the second time in American history that a president, current or former, has been criminally indicted by the Department of Justice. In both cases, that president is Donald Trump. In June, Trump was indicted in Florida for his alleged mishandling of classified documents after leaving office. Today's indictment is related to efforts by Trump to challenge the results of an election he lost. Up to CBS News has learned that attorneys for President Trump met with federal prosecutors in the special counsel's office last Thursday. Mr. Trump then posted on his social media not long after that meeting. And he wrote, "My attorneys had a productive meeting with the DOJ this morning, explaining in detail that I did nothing wrong, was advised by many lawyers, and that an indictment of me would only further destroy our country." CBS News correspondent Scott MacFarlane is outside the courthouse where the former president's indictment was just handed up by the grand jury. Scott?
It was at first sealed when it was handed up by this grand jury about 30 minutes ago. Now it's been released. It's a 45-page indictment with 4 felony charges. Let me read them to you, John. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. If that phrase, obstruction of an official proceeding, sounds familiar to you, it's because more than 300 of the January 6th riot defendants have faced that charge. The official proceeding being the January 6th electoral count. These are felony charges. Now, the second federal criminal case against former President Trump, just released here in federal court in Washington. This is where the case will exist, in Washington, D.C. And based upon the nomenclature of the case number, John, I can tell you this case appears to be assigned to Judge Tanya Chutkin, a 2014 Obama administration appointee who has been noticeably and particularly critical of what happened at the Capitol January 6th and has had some criticisms for the former president when she handles the sentencings of many of the January 6th defendants who've come through her court. So it's 4 charges that do align, John, with what we had from the target letter Donald Trump acknowledged receiving on July 15th. It's that language that indicated obstruction of an official proceeding and conspiracy against rights. We're going to read through the 45 pages of this indictment just released as handed up by a grand jury and its foreperson at 5:15 Eastern Time today, August 1st, 2023.
Scott, we're looking right now at the front page of the indictment. And would you go through for us those 4 counts again, for those of us who are not as well versed in this as you are? And as you say, this tracks essentially what the expectation was. But go through those 4 counts again, if you would.
3 of them have the phrase conspiracy in them, which is somewhat common in a federal case and certainly begs the question, are there more defendants to come? Would it take more than one person to execute a conspiracy? It's conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. Again, there's a very common charge from the Justice Department in January 6 cases overall. Obstruction of, an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, again, that official proceeding being the January 6th electoral count, which was very much obstructed for several hours that day, and conspiracy against rights, which is a broader term for a charge that goes against people who have power, positions of authority. In some cases, it's police officers facing that charge, or even judges in the past have faced that charge. In this case, it'd be a former president of the United States. There's a lot of granular detail in this indictment we're going to pick up on. But those 4 broad-based counts don't come as a surprise, John, based on what was in the target letter Donald Trump received. There were certain statutes quoted in that target letter that indicated these very charges. But this is an initial indictment of Donald Trump. His first federal case is in the Southern District of Florida. His second federal case right here in the nation's capital in Washington. And Scott, give us a sense very quickly, if you would, of the drama, if there was any, of this proceeding, or was it otherwise kind of business as usual in the federal courthouse? This happened in what I would characterize as a garden variety way. The magistrate judge on duty, Mokshila Upadhyay, was handling grand jury returns today, and about 5 p.m. Eastern time, 2 different prosecutors came in. A Department of Justice prosecutor to hand up from a grand jury 2 different charges on 2 unrelated cases, and then an attorney who's been associated with special counsel Jack Smith's case came in and announced the handing up of 1 indictment. The grand jury foreperson in the case was there in the room. They didn't give the initials or the name of the defendant in that case, as is often the case when grand jury indictments are returned. They said they wanted that case sealed. Well, it is now suddenly available and unsealed to the public. A 4-count felony count indictment of the former president. And just one note, logistically here, when you have a federal felony case, it has to come from a grand jury. A prosecutor doesn't do that unilaterally. It comes through the grand jury system, which is why we've been on high alert throughout this day, because the grand jury was seen here early this morning, departed here mid-afternoon, but the grand jury foreperson wasn't seen leaving. So we were expecting some movement in court, and it happened after court closing hours at about 5:15 Eastern.
All right, Scott McFarland, thank you so much with the latest reporting. Robert Costa, your thoughts on these 4 charges?
This is a stunning moment in American history. A former president of the United States has been accused of trying to defraud the United States. And this was, in the words of the special counsel in this indictment, a sprawling conspiracy to overturn a presidential election, not with Trump as some kind of accomplice, but as the person really spearheading the entire operation inside the Oval Office, pulling every lever of power, trying to pressure his vice president to overturn the election. We know former Vice President Mike Pence has been a key witness in this January 6th investigation. Conspiracy to work with someone like John Eastman, the outside conservative lawyer who authored what's called a blueprint for a coup, a 2-page document saying that Trump could falsely argue that there was voter fraud and thus the election needed to be sent back to the states. And why the term defraud the United States? Because the special counsel, based on our reporting, has been interviewing witness after witness saying, did Trump knowingly say he believed the election was rigged, even though he didn't have any evidence to back it up, but did he keep pushing this false claim? And they believe they have enough evidence based on all of these witness interviews that they can now say Trump went forward with these false claims constantly in front of the American people, knowing that they were not backed up by facts. Even if Rudy Giuliani was waving affidavits in the air, they didn't have credibility. This is an aggressive move by special counsel Jack Smith, not to paint Trump as someone who was called into some decision by outside lawyers, but Trump as the mastermind of an operation to overturn an election and take American democracy to the brink.
So the indictment says the former president of the United States spread lies, that he knew that they were lies, and the things that he was saying, not only he had reason to know, but actually knew were false. And to pick up on Bob's point, that makes the former president the central actor in the greatest crisis played out on live television about the peaceful transition of power in our country's history. And the indictment holds him to account. And it's also reflective, we should point out, of criminal referrals made by the January 6th committee. The first 2 referrals it made were obstruction of an official proceeding, and number 2, conspiracy to defraud the United States. Those were the first 2 of the recommendations that came from the House Select Committee on January 6th, and they are reflected in this indictment. And the former president has said, well, I got lots of advice from lawyers. You're the president of the United States. You are the singular person who either can set this in motion or stop it. This indictment and the available record, public and otherwise, indicate and confirm he was the central actor, he set it in motion, and now the law and the facts will try to hold him accountable.
Jeff Begay's Jack Smith will speak at 6 o'clock this evening, we're being told. What do you make of this indictment?
Well, let me first talk about what we're expecting from Jack Smith, if you don't mind. Obviously, we're not expecting a lot. You've seen him before. He doesn't say a lot, barely smiles. That picture is pretty accurate there. But if you look at this indictment, this is built on the backs of the 1,060 people who've been arrested, charged, convicted so far in the nearly 31 months since January 6th. There were a lot of people early on who thought, oh, there's no way they're going to charge a former president. Well, of course, if they believe he is the ringleader. And that's what you see in this indictment. There's a lot of work that has been going into this, not only by the special counsel's office, but also the U.S. attorney here in D.C. who has prosecuted all these people who followed the orders of the former president's supporters, as well as the president himself, come to Washington, D.C. They did. Some of them came armed. And of course, we saw what happened, and 1,000 of those people, and there are going to be more. You know, that investigation hasn't ended. This one hasn't really ended either. There's more to come.
There's some breaking news. Trump, the campaign, has responded. This whole indictment now, these series of indictments come in the middle of a presidential campaign. Trump's the Republican frontrunner in the 2024 race, and he is calling this, through his campaign tonight in his statement, election interference. And he's saying the Department of Justice is weaponized. And let me just read you one sentence from the statement from the Trump campaign to understand how the stakes are being laid out by Trump and his allies. The lawlessness of these persecutions of President Trump and his supporters is reminiscent of Nazi Germany in the 1930s, the former Soviet Union, and other authoritarian dictatorial regimes. So this is not just a response to a legal proceeding. This is a politically charged and historically dramatic moment with real gravity for what this country can endure in terms of American democracy when something's being compared by the Republican frontrunner to something that occurred in Nazi Germany, all while the investigation, as Jeff said, continues apace.
The former president has cornered the political market on florid language, especially when he's in duress. But that doesn't make it legitimate, and it doesn't make it true. To call something election interference when you are being held to the legal account of this country for interfering in the peaceful transfer of power is not only ironic, it is a form of psychological projection. The former president of the United States clearly, if you read this indictment, and available to everyone who watched live television on January 6, 2021, set in motion an effort to slow down, if not interfere or block, a congressional proceeding to certify that presidential election. That happened. To hold him and anyone associated with him to account legally for all time in our nation's history is not the act of an authoritarian regime.
Scott MacFarlane has the latest on when former President Trump will show up. Scott?
Our latest reporting, John, is that Donald Trump will make an appearance here at the federal courthouse in Washington, 4 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday. In short order, 48 hours after he's charged, he'll make his appearance here in Washington, D.C. This courthouse is massive. It's like the size of a small college basketball arena, 6 floors, dozens of courtrooms, many judges. His appearance will be before the same magistrate judge to whom this indictment was handed up today, Judge Mokshila Obadiah. She's the magistrate judge who handles initial appearances. In some cases, she handles arraignments. That's where Donald Trump will appear. If it's in her courtroom, it's the 2nd floor, courtroom 5 of this federal courthouse. But any number of security protocols will likely go into place, just like they did in Manhattan when the former president appeared there for court, just like they did in Miami when the former president appeared there for court. There are 3 entrances to this courthouse. It's a giant, and likely some of the areas here will be closed off for what is typically in the federal system a short initial appearance, measured in minutes. Not a lengthy procedure, but nevertheless an historic procedure with Donald Trump appearing here in 2 days.
Scott MacFarlane, thank you. Bob, quickly.
So as we read over this indictment of Trump, it's very important to note, as our colleague Graham Cates has noted in his reporting, that there are multiple co-conspirators listed on pages 3 and 4 of the indictment. And it's suggestive of people who are working with Trump, an attorney who willingly spread knowingly false claims to pursue strategies related to Vice President Pence's ceremonial role overseeing the certification, a political consultant who helped implement a plan to submit false fraudulent slates. So what you see from this document, and if you carefully read it, page 3 and 4 and other pages here, is that this was an operation alleged by the special counsel to have taken place on multiple fronts. Trump pushing people in the states, in the state legislatures at the Republican state level to try to send back alternative slates and to have activists act as so-called fake electors. At the same time, he wanted members of Congress to overturn the election on January 6, 2021. At the same time, he wanted the Justice Department to give their imprimatur and to say that the election was in some way corrupted by election false election action by people on the ground. And he wanted the vice president to be involved. So you really see the special counsel detailing everything and calling it a co-conspirator at work.
6 unindicted co-conspirators in the indictment.
Whose names we don't know yet.
We do not know yet.
Let's bring in Ricky Kleeman, CBS News legal analyst. Ricky, the special prosecutor says that the former president, shortly after the election of November 3rd, 2020, the defendant launched his criminal scheme. I'd like your take on what that means, but one more item from the indictment. It states that Trump widely disseminated his false claims of election fraud for months, despite the fact that he knew and in many cases was informed directly that they were not true. What's your thought about a criminal scheme and what you've been able to tell so far from this indictment?
Well, of a 145-page indictment, John, we're looking at, out of a 45-page indictment, we're looking at 130 paragraphs, which detail facts that create the elements of criminal offenses. There may be a political overlay here, and we can talk about the political overlay at another time. But right now, what we have in front of us is something that is a document that charges a person with criminal offenses that create prison time, and it is the result of a painstaking investigation. When we hear the word conspiracy, what also ought to come to mind is the timing. We are now on August 1st. We have a case that is supposed to come to indictment because the prosecutor has said so in Georgia. And Fani Willis, that prosecutor, has talked about the possibility of looking at a criminal scheme, same words, but as a RICO conspiracy, a racketeering influence, organized, corrupt conspiracy. One of the reasons that I believe Jack Smith finished up and got this out now was he needs his indictment to be first so that any indictment in Georgia does not try to supersede or contradict the Department of Justice indictment. And what's important to me here, John, is who are the victims. Not only all those Congress people and the people who were working in Congress on January 6th during that terrible day, but also it's the voters. It's the civil rights violation. Whose rights were abrogated? It's the voters, in the sense that their votes were going to try to be taken away by a scheme that had gone on for months to say that those votes in those 7 states should be flipped. And that's what stands out to me.
Ricky Kleeman, thank you very much. With us now is Scott Frederickson, a former federal prosecutor. Scott, pick up wherever you would like, but also would you address this notion that the former president mentioned in one of his social media posts? He said he was told by lawyers. Bob Costa has been reporting that may be one of the prongs of his defense, which is, I was just following the wise legal counsel of those around me. Major also addressed this. How much of a shield is that in this case?
Well, I think the indictment meets that head on. 5 of the unindicted co-conspirators are attorneys, his own attorneys, except for one who was a Justice Department attorney. There is a advice of counsel defense, but you don't have an advice of counsel defense when your own attorneys are your co-conspirators. If you assert an advice of counsel, you waive that privilege, and that means the prosecutors get to look at all those communications. An attorney cannot advise you to commit a crime, and you can't rely on that as a defense. So early on in the indictment, Special Counsel Smith lists 6 unindicted co-conspirators. 5 of those are attorneys. 4 of those are Trump's own attorneys. So, you know, he's entitled to a fair trial, but frankly, that kind of blasts any idea of advice of counsel right out of the water.
All right, Scott Frederickson, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
There's a couple other things that I think we should note. Right out of the box, the special counsel makes clear that his case is based on the premise that this was a president who was determined to stay in power and to do it by spreading lies about the false election lies about the lies about it being stolen. The other thing that we were waiting to see is whether, as part of the conspiracy, the special counsel would bring in the January 6th riot and insurrection, and he did. Part of the manner and means of the conspiracy as alleged in the indictment is that when it became apparent the Vice President Pence would not agree to stop his electoral college counting, which confirmed the election of President Biden, the former president encouraged a violent crowd to go to the Capitol, and they attempted to exploit that. So we didn't know if that was coming as well. The rest of it is incendiary, but as expected, use of false state electors, false certificates, the rendition of all the facts showing the president was told over and over again by a variety of people that his lie about the election being stolen was in fact false and was a lie, and he knew it. So all of that's laid out in this indictment in fairly clear form.
All right. Scott Frederickson, former federal prosecutor, thank you so much.